2:30 a.m. this morning. This is the future state of the motion picture industry.
"50-50 by 2020 to get women to get the bigger budgets as well."
It's very, very important that we put the stories in the hands of the people who own those stories.
Good afternoon. My name is Karina Rotenstein. I'm the conference producer of the TIFF Industry Conference, and welcome to our last day here at the conference, but don't worry, we've got lots of great programming heading your way. To begin, we would like to acknowledge that today's event is taking place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. We are so grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community. Just a few housekeeping notes. Just want to remind you that there's no professional photography or professional video recording, but not to worry, we are live streaming and recording this for you. This talk is currently living on our TIFF Talks channel on YouTube, so I know that you'll be taking lots of notes, and feel free to watch it again and share it with all of your colleagues. I think this is one that we definitely need to be sharing as widely as possible. And please also engage on our social media networks and using the hashtag TIFF19. Going green, sustainable practices in film and TV. As citizens, we are pretty aware of the effects of climate change, and within our industry, there is a growing movement to address how we impact our planet when making films and shows. Today, we are excited to welcome a roster filled with various stakeholders in our industry who have been employing sustainable practices within their fields and working with others to spread the expertise. One such person who has made it her mission and is leading the charge is Zena Harris, who will lead our discussion today, and she will introduce our esteemed guests. About Zena, Zena Harris is the president of Green Spark Group, a sustainability consultancy working across North America to implement sustainable production practices in motion picture. She works with studios such as Fox, Disney, MSNBC Universal, Amazon, and HBO on production, and consults for corporate clients and industry organizations such as Creative BC and the Producers Guild of America. She is the creative director of the Sustainable Production Forum, a conference dedicated to sustainability in entertainment. She also holds a master's degree from Harvard University in sustainability and environmental management. So she is the right person to be leading this. So please join me in welcoming to the stage, Zena Harris.
Well, thank you, Karina, and thank you, TIFF, for having me and for this opportunity to talk about what I believe to be a core component to our industry, sustainable production. I wanted to first start by introducing our esteemed panelists and inviting them to the stage, and then I'll dive in a bit more and talk about sustainable production. So first up, our panelists are Darlene Naponse, Ati Mache Anishinaabe from Northern Ontario. She's a writer, film director, and video artist. Welcome. Next up is Moana Casanova, manager of West Coast Productions at HBO. Welcome. And local to Toronto, David Hardy, Vice President, Stakeholder Engagement and Sustainability at William F. White International. So welcome, and thank you all for coming and listening in on this important conversation. I started focusing on sustainability in motion picture when I was in graduate school. Back in 2009, 2010, 2011, there were publications by Forbes, Newsweek, and other consulting groups that compared companies and various industries and how they were incorporating sustainability in various ways in their industry. And what I noticed was that entertainment always lagged behind. And I wanted to find out why that was. And that's why I decided to focus on the industry to do something about it, to help, to figure out how to help an influential industry share what it knew, what it was doing with the broader public, and hopefully influence culture in some way. So why do I believe sustainable production is a core component of our industry? I'm just going to toss a couple questions out to you all. How many of you like working in this industry, like working in motion picture? Yeah, a lot of folks like working in this industry. Okay, and how many of you want to keep working in this industry, learning and growing and thriving? Pretty much everybody, okay. How many of you want future generations to be able to work in this industry and be able to tell stories the way you all are doing, right? So yes, this industry is amazing. We know that. It covers diverse topics, opens up conversations, employs amazing, creative people. And just like other industries, we use resources. We use resources to make our craft, human resources, fuel, materials from all over the world. And all of this contributes to a production's impact on the environment and on the community. And this happens a lot during the physical production process. So just as we all want to keep doing great work and working in a thriving industry, I also can imagine that every crew member who works in this industry wants that too. So over the past 10 years or so, this term of sustainable production has been used to talk about how we can make entertainment with as little harm as possible. Everybody has their own definition of sustainable production, and mine is incorporating practices into the production process that reduce negative environmental impacts and engage positively with the cast, crew, and community to promote health and well-being and align with the production's overall budget. Now, the concept of sustainable production was for years thought of as a nice to have, as in, we'll make this film green, we'll focus on this film to do something sustainable, but those days are fading fast, and sustainable production is becoming more of an expectation. In the words of Chris Carter, a director, writer, and producer of The X-Files, one of the early projects I worked on in the industry, we make a luxury good, one people can very well do without. And in making this, we must hold ourselves to the highest standard and make it with as little harm as possible. Climate change is upon us. We hear about that. There is no debating it. It is fact. Many, many, many scientists agree on this. And organizations in all industries that do not work to reduce impacts will not thrive. We have a great opportunity in this industry because we have creativity and ingenuity on our side. We know that fuel consumption is the #1 contributor to a production's carbon footprint. Here is a graph that my team worked on, a production my team worked on. The point here is that the shape of this graph is consistent no matter what production you're working on. The numbers will vary, but the shape is the same. Fuel is the #1 contributor. So on this one, this production emitted over 500 metric tons of CO2 emissions, and that is equivalent to 108 cars driven on the road for a year, or 61 homes worth of energy, and that's just one production. So you can imagine all the production in this city and in other big cities and around the world. There are, of course, other factors to sustainable production: material use, reuse, plastic use, waste, recycling, compost, food, and donations, engagement with the community and what you're putting on screen. So here's an example of sustainable production actions that have taken place on a production in British Columbia. The point here is that there are a lot of possibilities when a decision is made to make a change. And the costs. The costs are always a central question that I get asked. How much does sustainable production cost? I'd like to ask, how much does it cost to not be sustainable? That's your current budget. Costs of being sustainable can be tens of thousands of dollars less. Yes, there are sustainable production practices that do have a higher upfront cost, and there are some that are cost neutral, and there are those that'll save you money right off the bat. So overall, what we're seeing in the work that we've been doing is an overall cost savings of around $70,000. It will vary, obviously, on the size of production and the types of practices being integrated, but this is what we're seeing, and we're seeing every department working together to get to this. It actually costs more to continue with business as usual. When you become used to doing what you've done on production, you've got your existing budgets, but the supply chain, because of the impacts of climate change, is becoming more risky. There are also savings to be realized in every department of production if you look for them. So how do we ensure a thriving industry? We must all be part of the sustainability journey, this solution, all levels of the industry, no matter where you sit in the industry. And here are just a few ingredients to collective action to keep sustainable production moving forward. Understand and acknowledge the issue. Provide and seek out examples. There are great examples out there from all over the world. Develop common goals within a city, within a province, or other jurisdiction. And engage people, crew. Everybody loves talking about this stuff once you get them going. Work together. We all do this on production anyway. This is a great opportunity to do something. Work together through a sustainability lens. And really celebrate the journey. Talk about what you're doing and talk about it within your industry, and then tell the public what you're doing, because it's an influential industry. So we all have a choice. This is one of my favorite slides, and I put it in almost every talk. We have a choice to continue with what we're doing, business as usual, and perhaps use an excuse of why something can't happen. Or we can shift how we make our craft, how we think about things. The worst that can happen is we do things the same way. The best that can happen is that you make a change. One thing, two things that you can institute on production or in your workplace. So this is it, folks. I mean, this is our planet. This is where we are. My call to action to you is to drum up the courage to make it happen. We as an industry can contribute to a healthy planet and a thriving industry. Thank you. All right. So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. Let's see here. I am going to switch. This is my attempt to not use paper. Makes me nervous. All right. So first off, I had mentioned that everybody has a definition of sustainability or sustainable production. So I'd like to just toss that question out to everyone on the panel. What is your definition of sustainability? Darlene, you want to go first?
Well, thank you for having me. Hello, everybody. Well, I work in my community, and so it's always the practice. I'm from Atikamekw Anishinaabe. It's in Northern Ontario, and I've made films in my community and with my community. So I think when films come in or when films are made, it can be quite a monster, and it comes in and explodes and then it leaves. What I'm really conscious about is working with the community and the impact that I'm making, not only with the environmental, but the social, and how, you know, each of that needs a balance. And so we're conscious into seeing what the best practices of the community is, but also what is our responsibility within blocking off a road, down to what are we adding on into the landfill. So we go through that, you know, from start to finish around those ideas and how we're impacting the community.
Moana, from your perspective.
So I sort of wear two hats. I'm a representative of HBO, and then I'm someone who cares a lot about climate change. And so fortunately, I've been able to sort of merge the passion I have for the environment to my role at HBO. And I've actually been working with Zena for the last year. We brought her on as a consultant to work with us on our sustainable production initiative, since I know production, but there is all of the science behind it. So for us, sustainability it's sort of an extension of what we've already been doing as a company, in that being good neighbors and contributing to the communities in which we film has always been really important and has always been part of our production process. But we hadn't been considering the environment to the extent of the fuel emissions and energy use and things like that. So we really kind of took a step back and looked at the full picture of what the impact areas are. And so for us, you know, there's so much more production both at HBO, across the industry, as all the streaming platforms are ramping up. So in order to continue doing what we are doing, we have to do it in a responsible way. Like Zena said, it is a privilege to work in entertainment, and we're also lucky to collaborate on storytelling, but we have to be able to literally sustain it, and take a hard look at the effects of what we're making.
And David, what do you have to say about sustainability?
There's a premise that we use in the film industry when we're shooting on location in people's neighborhoods, is to try and leave the neighborhood better than we found it. That's not always the case, but we do our best. We take pride as an industry, I think, in having as little impact on people's lives as possible, and I think that spills over into a much larger sense in terms of the kinds of practices that we're employing on the sets. It's great to clean up and to put the furniture back in the street as you found it, and maybe put a coat of paint on the park bench. But it's about reducing the impact that we have on that community while we're there, having the privilege of using it, and making sure that the communities in which we're operating understand that we're working hard to do that. I think there's a small production company, well, it's not that small, but a production company that often has films in TIFF called No Trace Camping. And I think that's my kind of mentality, is that you want to leave the environment as good as it was or better when you've come and gone. I think, to me, that's the way I look at it.
And along those lines, does that mean out of sight, out of mind? Like, if you have a bunch of waste, but you are able to get rid of it, is that leaving the environment in a better place, or is that still not drilling down far enough for you?
It depends on how the waste is dealt with, and we're in a bit of a crisis in the world, frankly, in terms of recycling. Recycling opportunities are ever changing and diminishing as we speak. So it really becomes, forgetting the 3 R's, it's really become the 2 R's, which is reduce and reuse. Bring circularity to the conversation, and try and do our best to to store additional materials that are used in production when the production wraps, instead of throwing them in landfill. It means looking at ways to change our habits. We're a horrible industry for water bottles, plastic water bottles. Getting rid of those and bringing a sustainability to that particular function, bringing water trucks on and having people have their own water cups, their own reusable water bottles on set. Getting rid of, I mean, this is the low-hanging fruit, but certainly it means, when you leave a community, it's not just getting everything off the streets, it's disposing of all of that material responsibly and ethically and sustainably.
Mm-hmm. What I found interesting when you were each sharing your perspective of sustainability is that the common thread was on the community. I mean, that seemed to be first and foremost before you started talking about environmental impact. And I find that to be really interesting because a lot of times I find people tend to think about sustainability immediately from an environmental perspective, and it kind of made me think, oh yeah, remind me that it is, hitting at various aspects of how we work. And so I'm just curious, when you are working in the community to reduce, to be good neighbors, to reduce your impact in various ways, where is your source of courage? I mean, I find that is kind of the sticking point sometimes, is the courage to act or speak up in some way, whatever it is. Where do you find your source of courage to, in whatever, in your various aspects of working in the industry to take that next step? Or where did that kernel start with you? Darlene, you want to go first? Or just start down the panel?
Well, I think it's, I don't know if it's like courage, it's the way that I was, I grew up. I grew up in a small community, or a small reserve in Northern Ontario, and so it's always about community, it's always about how respecting each other, but building also as a community. So my actions, I have to be responsible for all actions. And so when I'm bringing people into the community, I'm taking on that responsibility and how it's going to affect the community. So that's where I'm consciously coming from, is you know what I mean, what we're doing, is it benefiting the community, or is it, you know what I mean, have a negative effect on us? So we're constantly always asking ourselves that, and speaking with people in the community, because what one might come into a space and say, oh, well, this is the best way to do it, but they've already have a practice of how to do, you know what I mean, take care of the land, be with the land. So and talking with the community, talking with the elders, and being part of that. So it really comes from that space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I can imagine, Moana, I mean, kicking something off at HBO or having conversations internally. I mean, that must have taken a bit of courage.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think it started first with the desire to be responsible filmmakers and to do the right thing, and like I said, sort of like extend past what we were already doing. But the courage, for me, it comes from the science. So like as we've gone on this journey and I've learned so much about the science behind climate change, it's terrifying. Like this isn't, the climate crisis is a humanitarian crisis. It's a social justice crisis. So as a humongous industry with so much power to share stories with meaning behind them and sort of extend representation, like we have an absolute responsibility to affect change in some way, both on screen and behind the camera. We employ 300 people on a crew, and so it's educating everyone that how to do their jobs differently. And people don't love change. Like it can be an uphill battle, but it's so important. Like we just can't ignore the science. So that's what really kind of keeps me going and incited.
Mm-hmm. And David, from a industry equipment service provider. What has been your journey, your kernel of courage in getting this conversation to the next level within your own organization?
Well, I've got to say, having a conversation with colleagues in a company that has a significant piece of revenue in diesel generators and the cable that works with the various types of power that power sources that we're using, it's not an easy conversation to say, you know, we could be sitting on stranded assets in 5 years that are ridiculous. That we are, you know, they're going to be doorstops. You know, a 10-ton, 1600 amp generator. So there's a prerogative to get out and disrupt, and to be the ones, or to be in the group that is out there looking at new opportunities to reduce our footprint through technology and coming up with a new product that will likely have application way beyond the film industry. But just in terms of courage, I mean, that's easy. I have 3 kids, and that's where I get my courage, is that I'm going to have to live with the fact that my generation has not done enough and has witnessed and borne witness to the degradation of the planet to unbelievable lengths, and we've got to be the ones that really push the envelope to get this thing, not paper envelope, but
Virtual envelope.
yeah, a virtual envelope, to really incite action. You know, we've got a new generation, a 16-year-old kid from Sweden who sailed across the ocean to reduce her carbon footprint, who is an absolute hero of mine. That's great, but we've got to provide a smoother runway for that generation to make the changes that are going to hopefully help us all, save us all.
Save us all. Yeah.
But we absolutely need that kind of innovation, because we've been making movies and we've been making TV series like the same way for the entire history of the industry. So until there are alternatives, we won't see the change that we need. So looking forward to trying those generators.
Yes, yes.
So, how do we make the shift? I mean, what are you noticing on set, on your productions, with productions that are calling you up and requesting certain things? What are you noticing, in terms of, crew asking for certain things, perhaps, or the community asking for certain things, or, what are you seeing out there? What's the pulse of the industry from your vantage point for sustainable production? Go. I'll just toss it out to you.
Okay. Well, I think that as both Moana and Darlene have indicated, behavior is the biggest impediment to change. It's the biggest impediment to sustainability. It's getting people out of habits that they're used to. It's walking that extra 5 or 6 steps to put your compost in the compost bin instead of throwing it in the landfill bin. But it's, I'm seeing, I wouldn't say it's a tipping point yet, but I've seen over the last 5 years a real change in onset practices. I think British Columbia is kind of the leader in terms of awareness around and adherence and acceptance of more sustainable practices. I think that I can't speak for other markets other than Toronto and Vancouver, but there's been a long dormant desire, I think, with production technicians to be able to do things differently, and there just haven't been the services or the leadership to allow them to better express those interests. I think it has to come from the people who hire them, whether it's a studio or a network or just the line producer or production manager. Sometimes the production coordinators become the de facto sustainability people in a production because they're in a great position to be able to affect different parts. But I do think there is, just even in the last 2 years, we've seen people calling us up asking us if we have anything other than a diesel generator to provide power, and we do, thankfully. So do some of our industry colleagues that provide the same kinds of services that we do. So there are opportunities to start the ball rolling, and I think that a lot of the crew are finding that pieces of equipment can really help them. Once they get the hang of how to use them the most optimally, they're finding that they're indispensable. So that's a great place to be, and we're pushing the ball up the hill.
Good.
I think right now, at least for us, waste is kind of like the face of sustainability, and it's, as David said, that's low-hanging fruit, and I really hope that we will shift toward more innovative practices as the resources become available to us. But waste, it touches every single department because everyone goes to Crafty and everyone eats catering. So creating better waste management systems on set is really paramount. And it can be a little bit of a struggle at the beginning. We employ sustainability reps on our shows. So like a sustainability coordinator or an eco-PA, but someone who's really there to educate the crew, answer questions, problem solve along the way, but also make sure that the waste management systems are running properly. And they're training people, like the banana goes in the compost, which just to me just seems crazy that that has to be explained.
So does paper towel, for crying out loud.
Literally, we have to break it down. But it's people. You're working long days. You're busy on set. And every set's a little bit different. But by the end of after in series we have the benefit of longer runway. By the end of it, it's everyone's on board, and then people are bringing their batteries from home to recycle, and their single-use plastic bags, and it starts to permeate their lives, and then they're bringing it back to their families. So that's all really, really positive. But hopefully as things progress, a sustainable production won't just be a zero waste production. It'll be a solar-powered production and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely, that's amazing what everybody's saying, and I think it becomes around who you choose to work with, if they want to make those changes, and management. For smaller productions, and I'm just we make independent films, so we're not a large production, but we still have enough waste that we see. And so when you start counting, the amount of, garbage that's going into the, into the local landfill. And then also, but just kindly reminding everybody, it's you can recycle that, you know what I mean? And it's just and it becomes such a big effort, but it's so worth it. It's just just reminding people of, so it all becomes around choosing the right people to work with, managing those movements, and then just really kind of coming together as a crew to learn from each other and how we can do this differently. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So this concept of educating the entire crew and talking about what you can do. Does the word mandate come up for you all much? I'm just curious from your various perspectives. Is that taboo to say, or mandate something happen, or is it almost the producer can mandate something happen? What do you think about that?
Definitely, it should be. It just says, safe practices, or just being, kind and being a good person. Mm-hmm. It should be, part of your everyday practice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I agree, but it's particularly empowering when it comes from whether it's the showrunner, producer, executive producer, the decision makers and stakeholders. I can't be there every day, making sure things are running well. But we've had the great fortune of working with some producers who they really, really care about this, and they will enforce the policies on set. And then there are other producers who are no, I'm with you, but they need a hand, and that's why we're, have people to be there on set to make sure things run well. But you're right, just safety, it's just the way we're going to do it. I'm sorry, but you cannot have a plastic water bottle.
There you go, folks. You cannot have a plastic water bottle.
Yeah, I don't see any in the crowd there. But just to pick up on something Darlene said, is choosing the people you work with. And as a producer or as somebody in a position of power on a production, you have the ability to say, this is what I believe in, and this is the way my set and my show is going to run. And if you're game, let's play. And otherwise, thanks very much, and maybe you should look for another show, because I'll make your life a living hell by mandating that these practices are put in place. And we have a good friend in Vancouver, a former Toronto producer named Clara George, who's been out there for a number of years, who is that person. She starts a show. I mean, she doesn't need to mandate now, because she has a crew that will follow her anywhere, because they love the type of practice. Zena had a slide earlier that was from Clara's show, sure. that broke down all of the various things that she mandates. And I think she would argue with that and say, I don't have to mandate anything now, because it's just natural for everybody to show up and recognize that there are no disposables, there's no water bottles, there's no meat 1 day a week, no red meat 1 day a week. There's, there are systems in place to manage the waste. There are, plug-in cars in the production, EV charging stations. All of this stuff is stuff that is important to her. She said, this is the way I'm going to do it, and if you don't like it, that's great. Just don't bother putting in an application.
If anyone has the ability to say, we're not printing scripts because of security reasons, or we don't have cell phones on set because we want you to be present and engaged, you can just as easily apply that to sustainability.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we have, Darlene, you mentioned working on smaller productions, and Moana, you've got a vantage point from larger productions. Do you, have you heard, or is it a myth that you can't do this on, a small production or larger production because there's just too many people, or whatever the case may be? I mean, can we break that down? Size of production, does it matter? Is this a and/or kind of thing, or can you just, incorporate sustainability practices across the board on any size production?
I guess, I don't know, like sustainability, like what does that really mean? And how do, you know what I mean? And what does it encompass? Like we can say one thing is just like, the practice of, recycling, or the practices of composting, or, you know what I mean, no water bottles and things like that. But when I really, it goes back to the community and that perspective. You were talking about perspectives too. It's just like just really understanding why we're doing this. Mm-hmm. But also, I work primarily in First Nations communities. So what is their practices around sustainability, or understanding how do they see it within the future? Mm-hmm. And so I think it becomes a larger conversation in that way of understanding and bringing it, so it's not just one thing around defeating garbage, but it's also making it a social issue, making it part of, like we were just saying, but even going larger into investigating what was in the past and how can we go in the future. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've worked on, it's been smaller shows, really big shows that shoot in multiple countries. And yeah, you can absolutely do it on any show. It's a matter of resources. I do find that the lower budget shows, we don't really do indies, but just knowing how indie sets work, it's like when you don't have a lot of resources, like you don't work in excess, and that's sustainable. Like you're cost saving, but you're not buying tons of set deck that's not going to be used. Your caterer is preparing the right amount of food because they don't have the luxury of having 6 different protein options. So in a lot of ways, the smaller the budget, you can kind of you get thrifty, and there just tends to be less waste. What can be challenging is when there are premiums attached to some of the innovative things, like an electric generator costing more. That it might be harder to try some of those those new practices on a smaller show, but then we can try it out on a bigger show because there is more runway. So yeah, it's totally achievable on any footprint show, any size footprint.
So we've mentioned a handful of practices. What are a couple that really matter to you that you're seeing? I mean, community seems to be a central tenet for everyone. But I think a lot of times folks want to walk away with, all right, I want one or two things that I can do, or something to that effect. So, advice for the group, like, what are those one or two things that you're seeing that's interesting or innovative, or that you think must happen on production? You want to start, David?
There's an initiative that's underway here in Toronto, and it's replicated slightly differently in Vancouver, and that is all around catering. Like many aspects of film, there's always a default to get too much, as Moana was saying. Smaller productions have a harder time, but they're always getting too much. So at the end of a catered meal, having worked in the union world for a long time, you would see just tons and tons of food getting thrown out that was untouched. So we've developed an initiative here in Toronto called Film Feeds TO, and it is basically a system whereby the caterers at the end of a meal, in particular in the big studio complexes, so it's a little bit harder to achieve when you're shooting on location, but certainly doable, where the productions the caterers will package up and leave in refrigerators that the studios are putting into the lunchrooms. And then a group called Second Harvest, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, or if you're not from Toronto or from Canada, I'm sure there are social service organizations in your communities that do similar types of activities. But they will put that information that there is food in the refrigerator out into their sphere, and different agencies can come to the studio and collect the food and take it away. In BC, they're donating, probably 10,000 meals a year to communities. We ran it for 1 month in Toronto before we've got some tweaks to do, but it was we had about 15 or 1,600 meals in a month that were being donated. So that's something that I think is awesome. And I'll pass it over. I don't want to take too much more time.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the most exciting stuff is happening around community engagement. I would also say the education piece, the work that our Onset sustainability coordinators and eco-PAs are doing is just, it's incredible. They are literally like fighting the good fight every day, converting people, preaching the gospel of sustainable production, and giving the context to why it's so important by having science to back up like why these practices are so important. So I think that's incredibly exciting. And then it's the wins where we are able to repurpose our assets and redistribute them into the community. It takes a lot of effort and manpower because there's just a lot of stuff, and some of it's it's uniquely built for this one set, and it's like, who's ever going to use this again? But when we're able to find a new home for something, to have a bunch of wardrobe go to a homeless shelter, of course, donate food, whatever it is, like that is really exciting, and it gets crews really excited because everyone hates seeing this stuff go into storage to never be touched again, to go into the landfill, whatever it is. So however we can find a new life for those items, it gets me excited, and I know it gets the crews excited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Those are great practices. I also think around, I don't know, I just want to just turn it around and say advocacy around those bigger problems. You know what I mean? Like the water. like being aware of why, water is precious and water is our lifeblood, and understanding how we can protect that, and creating a larger voice within our stories and supporting those stories and listening to those stories around those issues, water, our social issues around just like how are our communities surviving, but advocacy around, those companies that are part of that, and how can we, even in communities that cannot understand what's happening in the larger context, how are we going to help, and bring those messages forward so that, this is not always affecting us every day, and that we can celebrate and we can survive, and that we understand, that power, and wanting to protect our Mother Earth.
So last question before we open it up in the last few minutes for your questions. I want to know how we as an industry own this. How do we own it and not have something imposed on us from a municipal regulation standpoint or any other, pressure point? How do we stand up as an industry and really own it? Instead of, you must do this, kind of turning mandate upside down. Yes, it is a directive sometimes, but how do we just get to that point of this is how we do things, and we're going to own it, and we're going to do shift culture, basically?
Well, I think paradoxically, a motion was passed in Vancouver 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, starting the process towards restricting and ultimately banning diesel generators from city parks. And that motion, that initiative, came from the film industry. So, kind of like we're shooting ourselves in the foot. But I think there's such a strong feeling that we ultimately need the help of legislation in some cases, or the threat of legislation to gear us into action. But I think we own it. I mean, it's a groundswell. It's not going to happen tomorrow that suddenly the industry says, "Oh, we're changing everything." It's just persistence and keeping at it and finding small victories and really publicizing them where we can, and building on that. I think that's the key.
Yeah, I think that legislation is really important because you just have to do what they're telling you to do. And I also think having, like this, talking about it, being voices for the cause, having the entire industry come together and say, like, this is how we're going to change. Having talent talk about it and really put their money where their mouth is, and like maybe stop taking private jets everywhere. But yeah, we need to change the way we do things, and we need to be vocal about it and lead by example.
Yeah, definitely agree with everything that everybody said. And I think, it becomes about practice. It just becomes like it's going to, has to be part of your daily life. I even think about my own, like all of that. But I think too, it's just like, you're gonna need the time to do that. And so it's just thinking differently. And so your sets become, they move differently. And and it's okay, it'll happen. It sounds really simple, but it can. Journey. Like, it's just like, yeah.
Yeah, I heard the saying not too long ago, practice makes permanence, not perfect, because are we ever going to really get, be perfect in how we do anything, really? But if we keep practicing, we will get to the point of shifting, and it will become a permanent habit for us. So taking one or two practices and implementing that, and then building on that, I think is probably key to that behavior change that you were talking about, and shifting engagement with the community in various ways. So we have a few minutes left, so I wanted to open up for a couple of questions. There are folks around with mics, so I'm just going to, we have one here up front. We'll start here. How about that?
Hello, my name's Kevin, and outside this life of producing short-form digital content, I sit on committees that deal with the social mandates that corporations face and help shape what the provinces in the country is doing in this regard. I guess what I wanted to point out that there's a lot of initiatives out there for microgrids, which a location set could be considered a microgrid. I just wanted to applaud you for the work you're doing, and if you're really interested in developing some initiatives for sustainable procurements with regard to generation and with regards to other services that you talked about, I would be happy to pitch in, and I might be in a position where I could help get some incentives for this initiative to make them cost competitive with traditional opportunities.
Bring it on.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent. We've got already support here. Okay, we'll do guy mid, yep, you blue shirt, yep. It's that blue.
Rather fetching blue shirt. Thank you. Listen, here's the weird thing. You guys are doing fantastic work at an industrial level, so to speak. And several of you have referred to changing attitudes. And the irony is you're working for the biggest attitude-changing industry in the world. So my question to you is, why do you think Hollywood, to use a generic term, is so rubbish at talking about this? So in an industry that is busting a gut to be more gender-friendly, more ethnically friendly, why are we ignoring this huge climate change? This is my third big festival of the year. I've come to every festival looking for stories about climate change, not documentaries about seals being murdered. God knows we can find enough of those, and those are horrible. But stories that deal with, for ordinary people, telling climate change issues. So is it not deeply frustrating for you guys to be doing all this? And it's pathetic, really, Moana, that you're having to say individuals are making changes when HBO is reaching billions of people. Does that not get your goat? You can tell it's getting mine a little bit.
Tell us how you really feel.
Yeah, what do you think about the storytelling angle of this?
I think it's a lost opportunity. That I know that there's not any kind of, I mean, you're not going to demand that your writers change the way they're writing, but it's amazing that just having some A-list actor in a movie and they go to a recycle bin and drop something in a recycle bin. You're absolutely right. I mean, I think it is slowly but surely happening, and I think that the content side of it, there's a huge opportunity to change behavior. I mean, we've seen it in all sorts of different facets of life that we find get changed by watching content. So there's an opportunity for sure.
People need to talk about it. Like we need to be called out for it, and the press is finally starting to. Everyone was really up in arms about diversity and inclusion, and everyone got behind it. We need more voices to say, like, enough is enough. We have to be the change that we want to see. So I will tell everyone at HBO that.
I think, too, once you allow people coming from their own perspectives, as like I would, you know what I mean, as an Indigenous person, and when we see Indigenous filmmakers speaking from that Indigenous point of view, you see that what happens and what has happened in their community, you know what I mean, and it's not going to be in a Western way. It's not going to be told in that perspective. It's going to be told through their vision and through their eyes and through their stories and through their histories. And so there are films being made in that way, but they just don't get a larger distribution.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question. We'll take the woman in the back there. Yep, you.
Yeah, I really like that point about content being more about like environment, and I just remember this. Someone like I think it was like Sister Joan Chiseter is her name, but like she said. I'm not religious, but I think Jesus is pretty awesome. But she said, like, there was Jesus, the caretaker that like took care of, people at a one-on-one level, like, but there was also Jesus the prophet who like really tried to like make, larger change by saying the opinion. And my question actually is, I was wondering what you guys are trying to do for like fuel or like thinking about fuel, because I understand it's a very big part of, sets. Yeah, thank you.
I'll take a stab at that. It's a huge thing. In fact, we're having conversations right now about, and I don't want to get too divulge too much yet, but we're looking at methods by which we can increase or increase the efficiency and minimize, not totally eradicate yet, but minimize the emissions from our diesel generators by just using different types of fuel. And I'm not talking biodiesel or renewable diesel, anything that has diesel in it. Just new technology. Well, okay, here it comes. It's putting hydrogen into diesel generators. It allows and don't get me going on the physics, which I can't anyway, but it's a cleaner, more efficient way of running the engines with no loss in efficiency of the generator, of the power source, and the ability to create, to have solid, sustained power. It's the first small step in a process that I hope will be multi-tiered for us, that will ultimately see us replacing our diesel generators with a non-emitting, silent, pristine series of replacements for power. So it's and not only that, but we're working with municipalities both here and in Vancouver to institute power drops all around the city that would effectively remove the need to have diesel generators everywhere. If there was an opportunity to tie into the grid at some of those hot spots where production always goes, you always know there's going to be a unit down on the lakeshore or down, parked there or parked in the CNE. Same in Vancouver. A lot of work is being done there. It's really about, we're working with some people that it's not so much about the product, but it's about the philosophy of decarbonization. We've got to get carbon out of the process.
Yeah, and that's big industry. And until we're there, the things that we can do now are encourage the use of hybrid and electric vehicles, plug-ins. There are solar panel trailers out there. There's not enough of them for the industry, but so slow wheels of change.
And I think too, once you, if you can, you know what I mean? I'd love to employ everybody, but the less smaller the crews, the less of the footprint you're going to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and being efficient where you can, consolidating runs, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All very doable. Everything that you heard today is doable, so go out there, make some change happen. I want to thank the panel today, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.